I will defend her. The janitor who saved a billionaire after her lawyer abandoned her in court. The courtroom was holding its breath when the man in a faded janitor's uniform stood up from the back row, his hands trembling but his spine unbending, and declared with a voice cracked by truth that he would not let her fall alone. In a place ruled by power, polished suits, and expensive words, no one expected the fight for justice to rise from a man who cleaned floors after midnight. Yet in that moment, when hope seemed to have walked out the door with her own lawyer, something raw and unbreakable entered the room, and nothing would ever be the same again. Before this story continues, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that courage can come from the most unexpected places, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that still believe goodness matters. The woman sitting alone at the defendant's table was known to the world as a billionaire, a self-made titan whose name once meant innovation, success, and influence. But that day, stripped of her confidence and surrounded by whispers, she looked smaller than her wealth ever allowed. Her company had collapsed under the weight of a ruthless corporate war, false accusations, and carefully planted evidence that painted her as a criminal mastermind. The press had already convicted her, the board had disowned her, and her legal team, once confident and aggressive, had quietly withdrawn moments before the hearing began. Fear of powerful enemies had emptied her bench, leaving her exposed before a system that rarely forgave fallen giants. She had trusted the law to protect her, just as she had trusted contracts, partnerships, and people who smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. Now, sitting under the harsh courtroom lights, she realized how lonely power could be when stripped of protection. The judge's eyes reflected impatience, the opposing counsel's confidence was almost cruel, and the public gallery buzzed with anticipation for her final downfall. No one noticed the janitor at first, the man who had spent months silently pushing a mop through the marble halls after hours, listening to fragments of conversations that echoed long after the powerful had gone home. His name was never important to the people who passed him. He was invisible by design, a man whose life had trained him to observe rather than be seen. He had once dreamed of being something else, something bigger, but life had taken its turns. Years earlier, he had lost his wife to illness and his son to an accident that shattered his world. Education became a luxury he could no longer afford, and survival became his only curriculum. He took whatever work he could find, eventually landing a night janitor job at the courthouse, where silence became his companion and knowledge slipped into him through overheard trials, whispered strategies, and legal arguments rehearsed too loudly in empty hallways. Night after night, he listened. He learned how cases were built, how evidence could be twisted, and how truth often depended on who told the story better. He read discarded documents, not to steal, but to understand. The law fascinated him because it was supposed to be fair, yet so often felt broken. Over time, the janitor developed an understanding not just of legal language, but of human weakness, ambition, and fear. He never imagined that knowledge would one day be called upon in the brightest courtroom, under the cruelest spotlight. He had noticed the billionaire long before her trial began. Unlike others, she sometimes stayed late, sitting alone in empty offices after the echoes of power faded. He had seen her exhaustion, her doubt, and the way she stared at framed photos of a company she once built with belief rather than greed. When her legal team first appeared confident, he felt relief for her, but as weeks passed, he overheard conversations filled with hesitation. Powerful names were mentioned with caution. Threats, unspoken but understood, lingered in the air. The janitor felt something heavy settle in his chest as he realized what was happening. She was being abandoned, not because she was guilty, but because defending her was too dangerous. The morning of the hearing, he arrived early, his routine unchanged, but his heart restless. He watched from the back as her lawyer stood, whispered something to her, and then walked out, leaving a vacuum so loud it felt like a scream. The judge prepared to proceed, the opposing counsel smirked, and the woman's shoulders sagged under the weight of betrayal. In that moment, the janitor understood that silence would make him complicit. Everything he had learned, every night spent listening instead of speaking, suddenly demanded a voice. When he stood, gasps rippled through the room. The judge frowned, security stiffened, and laughter bubbled from the gallery. What could a janitor possibly offer in a battle of billion-dollar accusations? Yet as he began to speak, something unexpected happened. His words were not polished, but they were precise. He outlined inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline, pointed out conflicts between documents that had been overlooked, and questioned motives that others had ignored. He spoke not as a trained lawyer, but as someone who had seen the machinery of injustice from the shadows. The judge, initially irritated, grew still. The opposing counsel's confidence wavered. The courtroom, once buzzing, fell into a stunned silence. The billionaire looked up, disbelief and hope fighting in her eyes. She had lost faith in people, but here was a stranger risking everything with no promise of reward. The janitor's hands shook, not from fear of speaking, but from the enormity of what he was challenging. He was interrupting power, defying expectation, and demanding fairness in a place where it was often negotiated away. What followed was not an instant victory, but a shift. The judge allowed a temporary pause, citing concerns raised by the unexpected intervention. Media cameras, once hungry for her humiliation, pivoted toward the men in the janitor's uniform. Questions exploded across social platforms. Who was he? Why did he know so much? And what did it say about a system when justice needed saving by someone society overlooked? In the days that followed, volunteer lawyers stepped forward, emboldened by the janitor's courage. Independent analysts reviewed the case, uncovering fabricated evidence and manipulated records. Whistleblowers, inspired by the sudden crack in the wall of fear, came forward with proof of the conspiracy that had targeted the billionaire. The narrative began to change, slowly at first, then all at once. What had seemed like a simple story of greed unraveled into a complex web of corporate sabotage and political intimidation. Throughout it all, the janitor returned to his work each night, quietly cleaning floors as if nothing had changed. But inside him, something had healed. He had acted not for recognition, but because his conscience demanded it. When the charges were finally dismissed and the truth acknowledged, the courtroom erupted not with applause, but with a collective release of breath. The billionaire wept, not because she had won, but because someone had believed in her when belief was dangerous. She sought him out afterward, not with cameras or grand gestures, but with gratitude. She offered him opportunities, education, and resources he had never imagined. Yet the greatest reward was not material. It was the restoration of dignity, for both of them. She rebuilt her company with transparency and humility, using her experience to protect others from the same fate. He pursued formal legal studies later in life, not to chase prestige, but to serve as a voice for those who, like him once, were invisible. Their story spread, not as a fairy tale, but as a reminder that courage does not ask for permission and justice does not belong only to the powerful. The janitor who stood up in court became a symbol, not because he was perfect, but because he chose to act when silence was easier. The billionaire who was saved became an advocate, not because she had suffered, but because she understood how close she had come to being erased. Just before the ending, we have a special request for you. Please comment below and tell us where you are watching from and what this story made you feel. Your words matter more than you know. As this story comes to a close, remember that the world often teaches us to look up to see heroes, but sometimes the ones who save us are standing quietly beside us, holding a mop, carrying grief, and waiting for the right moment to speak. If this story touched your heart, moved you to tears, or reminded you that humanity still exists in unexpected places, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement tells us that stories of hope still have a place, and together, we keep them alive.